Hi, Stuart Bruce here, and I am the Spare Time Property Investor. In these podcasts, I'm going to share tips, tricks and lessons that I've learned and will hopefully help you, especially if you're still working the 9 to 5. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Spare Time Property Investor podcast. This is actually the first episode of 2021 and it's from a conversation I had with Andy Graham, my mentor. We discussed what he did before he went full-time. So I wanted him to go back to what decisions he made, how he planned for it and all those bits and pieces, but also what he would do now and some advice for people who are balancing the day job and property investment. So a really good episode and I hope you enjoy it. But one disclaimer before we get into it, there's a kind of a gold curtain behind me. That wasn't my choice and it's not a permanent feature in my office. It's just something that Lara, my wife, put up for her gold leaf course for the videos for that. So please ignore it. It's a bit embarrassing. I totally forgot it was up until Andy drew my attention to it. But anyway, just ignore that. And otherwise, it's a really good episode with a very, very experienced property investor. So I hope you enjoy it. Just a couple of things to say. The next free monthly newsletter is coming out soon. So if you want a copy, go to the link in my bio and you'll be able to sign up to it. But you'll also be able to see previous issues. And also, if you get some value from this episode, please like and subscribe. Please share it on your socials. It just helps me get to more and more people. So without wanting to waste any more time, here's my conversation with Andy Graham. So thanks again, Andy, for joining me today. It's great to have you on. So first off, it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and give us a bit of background about you in property.
Well, thanks, Stuart. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Well, I guess, my story goes back over 10 years in property, really. And, my professional career, which I'm sure you probably want to ask me about today, was as a physio. And for the last 10 years, really, since I decided that physio probably wasn't for me long term, I took the idea of getting into property a lot more serious. So I started to build my own portfolio and that went well. And then, of course, I ran out of capital and other resources and then had to change my ideas about what I was going to try and do and how I was going to try and achieve that. And so I started a business and that business then grew very rapidly. And that business was all about HMOs as well. And then that evolved and has continued to grow. And then I suppose I've gone on a few tangents as well. Outside of that main business, I have my consultancy where I work with some investors and I have the HMO mastermind which I co-host with somebody and got my own podcast as well, which actually you were the inspiration for me to start.
Thank you. That's amazing of you to say so, but that's great. Okay, so see, obviously since you started investing in property, it's evolved, you've done lots of different things, and I would assume when you first started investing in property, you couldn't imagine what you've gone on to do. So what was the first kind of intention when you started investing?
Well, I had some sort of inbuilt attraction towards the idea of buying a property, maybe building a business out of property. And I think it came from spending a bit of time on building sites when I was a young boy. My dad's a teacher, a retired teacher now. And my uncle was a builder, and those guys, they were doing self builds when I was a child, and dad and mum, my auntie and uncle built their own houses, and so we'd be carted around these building sites as our new house was being built. And don't get me wrong, they weren't developers in their own right, but I just remember spending time on building sites. That was when you could have a sand pit on a building site and health and safety weren't there, sort of telling you, you couldn't do it. So I think there was something there, probably a seed sown at that stage. But of course, as a young adult, I didn't have the sort of cash or even the earning capacity to save to go and buy something. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that really I could do anything about it. But I'm quite sure that that's where it came from. I think my dad and my uncle really sparked some sort of an interest in it.
And I think it's great to have the opportunity to be exposed to being on a building site and things like that when you're so young, because it is something that inspires people, and you kind of you go for what you're exposed to, and yeah, you can kind of follow on from there. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. That's a good insight into how you kind of got that first spark. But going back to something you said earlier about the physio, so what when was it, I suppose, when you realised that being a physio wasn't for you long term? Because you must have trained up for it. You must have kind of decided that was something you wanted to pursue. So what was it that kind of made you think, not for me?
Well, it's a really good question. And in retrospect, it's a lot easier to answer. But at the time, it wasn't that easy, although there was something about it that wasn't quite right. But I didn't have experience with other things. I hadn't worked as anything else, so I didn't really have anything to benchmark it against. And actually, it was a really tough decision when I finally accepted that it wasn't for me. But I think if I'm totally honest with you, Stuart, you know, I probably knew it wasn't for me when I was studying it.
Okay.
Um, don't get me wrong, I really appreciate um, the the degree that I got, and I have an incredible network of friends, still my very best friends from that period in my life. But I think I realized that the actual work of being a physio just wasn't for me. I didn't find that it engaged me enough, and I actually did quite well as a physio. I specialised very quickly, and then I moved into private work quite quickly. And actually, I was earning pretty decent money as a private physio, and I was doing some locum work, and that was when
Mhm.
you could get paid pretty lucrative rates as a locum, and it was really flexible, so you can do it on your own terms. And that was actually one of the things that really helped me transition. But I think I knew, even when I was studying it, that I wasn't switched on. I certainly wasn't passionate about it. And I remember, even as a student, going on placements and really having that dread, that kind of Monday morning dread. Oh, got to go to work today, got to go and do my work as a physio. And as I've got older and I've really found my passion, I know that you know that's what it was. That wasn't
Yeah.
there, and it is there now. So I realize now that it probably never existed. It just took me a while to figure it out. And probably more than that, it took me a while just to develop the confidence to
Yeah.
accept that that was the case. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was before physio. That was before property. I didn't have a business, so it wasn't like I had a great alternative to go to at that stage. I probably just knew deep down that I wasn't a physio long term.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't in my blood.
And like you're saying, unless you have something you're kind of you've got a plan for to move on to, what do? You kind of think, well, I might as well just continue doing this thing because what's the alternative? But I think those jobs, though, I think they are like the people who continue to do them are so passionate about it. It's their life,
Yes.
it's their
Yeah.
calling, and
Absolutely.
hats
Yeah.
off to people who do it.
Yeah, and honestly, Stuart, that wasn't me. I wasn't in
Yeah.
love with it. There were parts of the job that I really enjoyed. I wouldn't say there was anything that I enjoyed, and the parts of it that I really just didn't enjoy doing. Um, if I'm honest, I enjoyed my locum work, the flexibility of the locum work, and being able to make a bit more of an impact and do it on my terms in the private environment.
Mm.
But it's a tough industry because as a physio, if you want to work in the private sector, well, your biggest competitor is the biggest, one of the biggest employers, perhaps the biggest employer in Europe, and they're offering the service for free. So you've got to be realistic. What sort of potential long term do you have to create something quite significant? Some
Yeah.
people do. There are a few examples of that, private businesses, but it's very tough and there's very little opportunity. And most of it now is monopolized by GPs and the guys that got in very early and they had that early adopter
Yeah. Yeah.
benefit. I was too late.
But I mean, it doesn't sound like you would have, if you'd have spent time building something in that world, it wouldn't have worked for you anyway. To be honest, so
Yeah,
it's a good job you didn't have the opportunity to build something
yeah.
very lucrative that would have distracted you from building this fantastic career you've gone on to do. So
Well,
yeah.
actually, and I've probably never been asked, and therefore never told anyone. But actually, I did have a punt at starting my own physio business.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, it didn't work.
Fair enough.
It didn't work.
Why not?
Um,
Like, can you, looking back in hindsight, can you identify why it didn't work now? Or
probably a few reasons. I mean, in part, I wasn't ready to build a business. I didn't. I was excited about the idea of building a business, but really had no idea with what was involved, systems and processes
Mhm.
and the commitment. So I was probably just naive in that sense, but also a lot of work in the private sector as a physio and other allied health professions is insurance based, and dealing with insurance companies is not easy. I mean, you'll know that if you ever had to claim insurance. Well, you try and earn money from them. Let alone get paid for the policies that you've got with them. But it's really, really difficult. But you need them if you're going to build a private business. So we did have some of those clients, Bupa were one of them and things like that. But they really just kind of hammer you down on the price. And actually, when you look at how much time you've got to spend to see the patient and then do the paperwork before and after, you're thinking, actually, this is taking an hour and I've been paid 30 quid for that session. It was
Yeah,
very difficult to scale the idea.
I've never
It was
thought.
inconsistent.
I've never thought of it, in terms of the insurers being your kind of your biggest kind of source of potential people to come to your your office.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I've just remembered.
Not a great, not a great customer to have, to be
No, no.
honest.
I've just remembered my only ever experience of going to a private physio. I had like some hip pain, and my GP said, "Oh, go and see a physio." They did all the pulling and prodding and all this sort of business, and the guy in the end declared that I was chronically weak, so I needed to, I needed to go. He gave me some big elastic bands to like go and do some exercises with. Needless
Yeah.
to say, I wasn't going back to that guy. But is that the sort of thing you'd have? Is that the sort of thing you'd have told people?
Well, so in a nutshell, honestly, Stuart, that was what, that was it for me. It was so prescriptive, and the reason was, in fairness to the physios that do work incredibly hard and train, to an incredibly high level, and they actually have a huge amount of responsibility and liability. And I caught so many nasty things, because actually we were often used as an alternative to the GP service
All right.
on a political and economic level. We were actually quite economic for the health service, but what it meant was that we would often see patients that would come through with the weird and wonderful, and you know it was our responsibility to catch a lot of that stuff and make sure it went off for a scan if it needed, or to make
Mm,
sure it was investigated if needed. Um, but you have very limited time, particularly in the health service. The lists are so big, and there is a lot of chronic pain that's very difficult to actually treat in those short terms, and so it becomes quite prescriptive. And giving someone a band and some exercises on a sheet that you print out was largely what it became. And it just didn't engage me. It didn't fulfill
I
me. I
can
didn't feel
imagine.
like I was doing anywhere near the best I could, but I felt like the system was broken and I wasn't the person to fix it.
No, no, and this is it. Yeah, I'm really glad we've got into this because I think people will be aware of you because they'll have seen your pieces in magazines. They'll obviously be aware of you on Instagram and all those things. So I think it'd be really, really interesting for people to hear that you were a normal human being with a day job before you become, Andy Graham, the property mogul type. So
I promise you, I still am very normal.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
after
yeah,
this,
absolutely, yeah.
after this podcast, I'm just going to go to the gym and train because I haven't trained today, and then I'll come home and I'll make dinner for Jem because she doesn't normally get home till about 9, and then I'll probably watch something really rubbish on Netflix.
No, it's really great. But going,
Yeah.
going going back to when you had that normal day job, and obviously you were kind of transitioning out. It sounds like you did some like private locum work or something like that. But what are the biggest kind of fears and then also obstacles to working your way out of the day job into a kind of a career in property?
Hmm. Well, I suppose the big fear is that you move away from the standard. You move away from the security of having a job in the NHS. You don't have holiday pay. You don't have pay if you're sick. And actually, that stuff happened to me when I was younger, and so it's a bit of a punt in that sense. And also, you move from working in these really big teams. I mean, if you work in a hospital or any sort of decent sized practice, you're surrounded by people, or the physios, or the health professions, doctors, admin staff, and it's a really great environment. And actually, it's one of the things that I miss more than anything, is being surrounded by those people. I've got lots of great friends from that, lots of banter.
Mm.
People, they're good people. And when you move away from that and you work as a locum, you're a one-man band. You turn up, you do the work, and you get out of there. Nobody's really bothered about talking to you. You're not a team member. You're not on payroll, and so that bit changes. And obviously, yeah, the security of having that role disappears. What if the locum work isn't there next week? And you never knew. There was always locum work available, but you'd have to travel for it. I worked all over the country and stuff like that, and you can definitely get sucked into that as well. And that's a bit of a risk. You can work really, really hard, and then you realize actually you've been doing it for 6 months. You've not taken a break. You've not really got that many friends in the industry because they're all working down at that department and they're all good pals. In terms of the obstacles, though, that you have to face, well, the big one, particularly when you're starting a business, if you move away from a professional role, is that your status changes from employed to self-employed, and then all of a sudden, you're like the devil to some people. Banks all of a sudden think you're this untrustworthy individual who doesn't have any earning capacity, and you're high risk, and actually that makes things really challenging. Just getting lending and accessing finance and having conversations changes overnight, and it's really, really very tangible. Just how much of an impact that can have. And for the first couple of years before you prepare your accounts, not many people want to touch you, in all honesty. So
Yeah.
you've got to find other solutions around that problem.
So that's really interesting, because a lot of people, obviously, when they get into property, they get into property so they can leave their day job. And I've had conversations with other people on the podcast about kind of not rushing into it and making sure everything is in place. But no, I don't think anybody has said it in those terms, in terms of, that day when you leave your you leave your salaried job, which looks very, very secure to a bank. All of a sudden it switches, and you're no longer that kind of safe that safe bet in terms of being able to meet your kind of debts and things like that. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear it in those terms, because I do think it's something that people are maybe unaware of, maybe a little bit naive about, in terms of what life would look like when they kind of ditch the day job and things like that. So that's really interesting.
I think there used to be this, like, it was almost trendy to encourage people to quit the day job and go at it, and go solo. And it wasn't how I did it. And I'm probably quite cautious in that sense. But I just felt like it was almost irresponsible to tell people to do that, because having done it and knowing how difficult it was at times to raise finance, actually, yes, moving away from your day job, if you could afford it, would give you a lot of time back. But actually, there's a huge compromise that you have to make in a number of ways. And I think a lot of people are naive to that, and it's sad. And I've seen people really struggle. They've come out, and all of a sudden, these great plans they've had have actually been incredibly difficult to deliver on. And just very simple things like banks not being interested in talking to you because you don't have a job is one of those fundamental parts. And I think, thankfully, that's changed a little bit in the industry now. But certainly, when I guess I've been knocking around in the online property communities for about 10 years, way longer than I've been on Instagram maybe for a year or two. So, my time on Facebook and in groups and things like that well predates that. So I've seen a lot over the years and heard a lot, and that was always something that concerned me a little bit. And I think it has changed now. I think the the general advice out there is to do it when the time's right, and to
Yeah.
bridge the transition sensibly.
No, I think that is something that's definitely being spoken about more. I definitely see some posts, and it's very much like, do this course 6 months. In 6 months, you'll be, lying on a beach somewhere and things like that. So I suppose there are still those people out there who are selling that. And the
I
thing,
would have never, I'd have never signed up to that course because, the beach is just about the worst place in the world for me. I've got fair skin. I don't particularly like bright lights. So if they said you can leave your job and go and spend your time in the mountains all the time, I'd have probably signed up though.
well, yeah, yeah. I mean, we've never talked about this, but that's a shared passion. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
something that, yeah, yeah, damn straight, yeah. That's definitely something. I do like the sun as well. I like a bit of both, but yeah, no, the mountains are definitely something I'm big into, and I
That's
feel
actually one of my that's like one of my vision board goals, Stu, is is having a place out in the mountains. Just
same.
like
Yeah,
sure.
me and my friends went to the three valleys in February. It's amazing,
Mhm.
and we at that on that holiday, me and my friend were both saying actually it would be great to get something, and like yeah. So yeah, it's something I'm definitely wanting to get to as well. So yeah, yeah. But yeah, cool. Um,
The European market tanks.
Sorry.
If the European market tanks, the property market tanks, if the European property market tanks, I've decided I'll try and buy something then.
Oh,
But at the
really?
minute, yeah, at the minute, if you want to buy a ski chalet, you need really deep pockets,
Yeah, no,
very,
I can
very deep
imagine.
pockets.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah,
We're going off on a
maybe
tangent a
one day.
little bit. We're going off a tangent a little bit, but where would you buy that chalet? What resort or what area would you buy that chalet?
Good question. I've skied, I actually snowboard predominantly all over the world. If I could wave a magic wand, and don't tell Gemma this, but Gemma wasn't in the picture, I'd probably go to Canada,
Oh, really?
but
Okay.
I wouldn't. Yeah, yeah, because the riding out there is just different, and I love the
No, I've
Canadian
heard.
people. I
Yeah.
love Europe, and I love the European culture. But obviously, that wouldn't work. You can't just nip over to Canada for a long weekend like you could do to Europe. As I don't think Gemma would be happy if I was always
No.
sending off to Canada weeks at a time. I'd probably buy in France because I really do love
Yeah.
I love the riding in France, love the French culture, and I've spent a huge amount of time out there.
Yeah. No, same. I think France is. Although I've not been to Canada yet. I've had friends have been over there and rave about it and stuff. But obviously, yeah, same. It would be a bit tricky in terms of balancing things. But yeah, no, definitely, yeah. Cool. Okay, so going back to property, what do you think are the biggest challenges for people getting started in property at the moment?
I think the single biggest challenge is overwhelm. And it's actually not just property that overwhelms people. It's not just the idea of building a property business or a property portfolio that overwhelms people. It's the idea of building a business. Where do you start? How do you start? Who do you do it with? Where do you do it? All these questions are big questions, and we know that if we don't get that right, then actually we'll build the wrong thing. There's no point building a house on poor foundations in
Mm.
the wrong location. You've got to get it all right, and that stuff really does take time to know the answers to. You've got to ask the questions and you've got to find out the answers. And one of the difficulties is, where do you start? Where do
Mhm.
you start? Do you go and reach out to somebody for help and guidance? That might help, but it might not be the answer. Do you find it out yourself? But how do you know that what you found out is accurate and it's going to be right? So there's a confidence piece there as well. Um, and to some extent, there's nothing wrong with it. Feeling overwhelmed is okay, but it isn't. You have to break through that barrier, and you have to find a way to focus on your objective. And for a lot of people, just defining that objective is really, really tough. Is it student HMOs? Is it professional HMOs? Is it low income HMOs? Is it on my doorstep? Is it in the northeast? Am I doing 4-bed HMOs, 6-bed? Am I doing rent to rent? You've really got to narrow it down. And To be able to do that, you need to understand how all of these different things work independently, and then you need to know how they could work together to really build you what you want. And that's got to deliver your vision. It's no point if it suits somebody else's vision or somebody else's goals. It's got to be really anchored to your goals and what you want to achieve. But it's incredibly overwhelming, and you've just got to get started. You've got to get started, and you've got to find a way to focus on your objective.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think I share that opinion about overwhelm. That's definitely something that I've experienced a couple of times within property. And this is one of the things I really appreciate about. I mean, you mentor me, so I really appreciate that kind of clarity and that longer term vision. I suppose because you've been there, you've done it, you've built businesses, so it's knowing that. If you're putting in if you're doing the right things to put in the foundations, then it leads on to what I'm really aiming for longer term. But it's knowing those steps to take to get there without everything falling apart when I do get there, in terms of the business being set up and where I want it to be. So
Definitely. The piece that most people skip, and it's not ever intentional, but it's perhaps the most crucial bit, is stopping to really assess what they really want to achieve. And people struggle to think beyond the next 6 months, the next 12 months. And actually, it's a really valuable exercise to think well beyond that. Think 5 years and think 10 years, because what you decide to do and how you do it will actually be quite different. Buying property is really capital intensive, and it's really tough when people come to me for advice and they're limited in terms of the resources, the capital at hand, or maybe their earning potential. Ultimately, you need capital. You've got to raise it from somewhere. Either you've got to earn it and save it, or you've got to borrow it. It's really that simple. But long term, if you stick to a plan to do that and recycle profits and reinvest over the long term, you'll probably be able to achieve a huge amount. But over the short term, it will be tough. It will take you time. If you wanted to, just short-term wins, you'd look at a strategy like rent to rent. It's much lower. The capital requirement is much lower. The barrier to entry is therefore much lower, and cash flow relative to your investment is much, much higher. But of course, long term, it's probably, for most people, not going to give them exactly what they want, which is freedom and independence and assets that generate cash. Rent to rents expire, they get tired, and ultimately they get handed back. So long term, it doesn't suit most people's visions. So stopping to really think about what people want to achieve in the first instance is absolutely the most important thing, and putting a plan together that will help people get there over the long term and not always in the short term is really, really important. The long term goal will ultimately determine what the short term steps are.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, because you built these companies, it's invaluable having that kind of that longer term vision. Yeah, it's really great. What's your favourite deal that you've done so far? Thinking back over those kind of 10 years, what do you think? What would you kind of point to in terms of your favourite, whether that be kind of the most profitable or the kind of the biggest turnaround, or what really?
Yeah, the favourite ones for me are not the most profitable ones. I've got some really great deals because I've kept most of the HMOs that I've ever bought. But I think my favourite ones are probably the ones where I hold the most sentiment towards them. And you might be surprised to know, but I used to work on the sites myself. I used to roll my sleeves up and go and sweep the floors and put some joists up and piss the builders off when I make a mess or whatever. That's the truth. But I love being on building sites. I actually loved being on a building site as well. I loved learning new skills. It certainly wasn't my forte, and clearly it wasn't the best use of my time. And I did learn that. But I've got some great memories of doing that and lots of sentiment. So I think one of my favourite properties would be a deal that I did in Cornwall. So when I finished as a physio, it was 2009. But it was the peak of the recession. So you try in Sheffield, which is where I graduated, when you've got 100 graduates in Sheffield and 100 in Wakefield and 100 in Nottingham and 150 in Newcastle, and there was so much competition for a handful of jobs that I just decided rather than hang around, I'd go down to Cornwall, and I'd do some surfing, and maybe it'd be a bit easier to get a job down there. And actually, it was. I got a job quite quickly there. It was only a temporary job, became permanent. But what I ended up doing was staying down there for about 6 or 7 years. And I started to build my business in the Midlands quite early on, but that was a long, long way away. So what I actually did was I went over to a place called Falmouth, and I bought a HMO there. And that HMO, it was really outside of my comfort zone. It cost a lot of money. I didn't have the support of my dad, who had been helping me in the Midlands and things like that. So it was a real step outside my comfort zone. It was really expensive. It was a market I didn't know, and I spent a lot of time there. I actually lived on the project while it was being done and developed, and I made it, and it was incredible. It was brilliant, and I just have a lot of really great memories. I never intended to sell it. I always, I actually thought at that time I'd probably end up living down there, but in the end, I came back up here, and from Sheffield, that was about 350 miles away. And I loved the house, but it made sense to sell it. So I made some good money on it while I was being let as a student let. And then actually I sold it just before the stamp duty thing kicked in, or several years ago. And I made a lot of money on selling it. And so, it was good from a financial point of view, but I've got lots of great memories at that house doing the work myself with my pals and stuff like that.
I think there is something really nice about knocking houses about. I think it's quite a fun thing to do, really. I love the tearing stuff out. I think that has to be my kind of favourite bit. The trash in the place. I'll do that all day long, really. But do you ever get tempted? I know you don't need to go back to sites, but is there any like element of it you just kind of think, oh, I'd love to go and knock that wall down or whatever?
Oh yeah, most days I feel like I could just go knocking a wall down. I think that's something to do with having staff and lots of tenants. Uh, but yeah, I love it. I love getting involved. But I've got other priorities now, and I realise that generally knocking a wall down creates a problem for somebody else. And I don't really like picking the bits up as much as I like knocking it down. So I try and keep off the sites now.
You could waltz in there, lump hammer and your sledgehammer or something like that, smash it around, and then all right, I'm off, tidy it up.
Yeah. Well, that's what I used to do.
That's great. That's really. And I saw your post the other day actually when you were I can't remember what it was now, but you were referring to when you did when you were at a project and being hands-on. I think it was the last project you were on the tools. And it's good to know that people who steps for people at my stage, people who are a few steps ahead or a few years ahead, or have much bigger portfolios and things like that, started on the tools, started kind of getting their hands dirty and doing all the stuff that we all seem to have to do at the start. So it's great. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I think
go on, sorry.
Well, I think, in a way, it's earning your stripes, isn't it, Stuart? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I grafted really bloody hard to buy the properties I did and to refurbish them. I was at every single one of the properties in my 20s, refurbing it myself. I used to do 700-mile round trips almost from Cornwall to the Midlands to work on my houses at the weekends when the builders had left. I probably would struggle to do that now. It was hard work, but you've got to work hard if you want to get results. Nothing. Yeah. Comes easy.
And that, I'll tell you what, it's stuff like that. I always think, people who are prepared to put the graft in, I think it really pays dividends. And I think there's a lot of people, not just in property, but in a lot of areas of life, who just want the easy way. And it's like, well, you can have the easy way, but it's not going to show a lot of value over time. If you put the graft in, like the 700-mile round trip, that is commitment, isn't it? It's putting in commitment for something is going to pay off in the long term, and it has. So yeah, it's great. Definitely. Inspirational. It's really good. Cool. Okay, so get into some of the other questions we always ask. So what 3 tips have you got for the listeners that helped you invest in property around your day job?
Well, I actually think this is a pretty easy one to answer. Be patient. You've got to be patient in property. It's not an industry where things move quickly. Solicitors still do stuff by paper, which is mad. So, you've got to be patient in this industry. You've got to be persistent, doggedly persistent. It's hard to find good deals. It's hard to get things done in the budgets that you need to get them done to make your deals stack up. It's hard to get stuff done in the timeframes that you've got. So you've got to be incredibly persistent. And then you've also got to be, more than anything, consistent in your actions. And this is where so many people fall down, in my experience, because they get stuck in, they work hard, but they don't see the results as quick as their expectations would have allowed them to believe that they would see them. And so they give in, or they reduce the pace, or they just take the foot off the gas a little bit. And sometimes they're maybe just this close to achieving something great, but they haven't been consistent enough in it. So I think all 3 of those, really for me determine whether or not someone's going to achieve their goals. And you can apply the principles to anything, any property business, any type of property, any business at all.
No, I think they're really great tips, and I think I'm definitely developing the patience and consistency. So no, I can definitely see the benefit of those. Have you got any business or property books you inspired you, or you go back to, or you'd recommend to people?
I'm not a huge reader, in all honesty, and I do listen to a lot of audiobooks though. One of my favourite books is actually a book by Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins is obviously most well known for his self-help kind of stuff, and naturally that's not really what I enjoy. But he wrote a book about investing. He's actually an incredibly talented investor, and he's made a lot of money through his various investments. I think the book's called Unshakable.
Okay.
I think. And really he talks about the principles of good investment. And it's not specifically about property, but the way in which he discusses it and the people that he's got his advice from and the information in there from them is really, really brilliant. And, it can be applied certainly to a property business. And, I really enjoyed that book. And, there were definitely a few penny dropping moments in that book for sure. Another book I like is one called Scaling Up. It's a little bit dry, but if you're running a business, it helps you, it takes you away from the kind of the big glossy ideas of creating something fantastic, the dreamboat world, and it actually helps you focus on some of the key activities that you need to do as a business owner to help a business grow. Talks about systems and automations and managing profitability and forecasting and those key concepts that really a good business owner needs to get their head around.
No, that sounds really good. It sounds again very much a way. What I like about when you talk about property, it's not property specific a lot of the time. It's about business. It's about kind of having that really a real kind of foundational understanding of how businesses work, and property is just the chosen kind of method of making the money and things like that. But it's a business, and I think those books sound perfect to kind of get a bit of a foundation in it. So that's great. Have you got any top tools you couldn't live without?
What tools? Well, we have letting software that really keep everything in one place. Um, that's really important. Maybe not so important when you're in the early stage and you're managing a lot of stuff. Um, it's really useful to have everything in one place, all your notes about any tenant, any tenancy, any property, raise job sheets and things like that. So that's a really useful piece of kit that we use in our business, and we
Mhm.
definitely couldn't survive without it at all. And we've probably got a bit of an expensive piece of kit. It does a lot. You don't need something like that, and there are some out there that would help people manage smaller portfolios but still do it really effectively. And they don't cost a huge amount. And if you can say, well, does that save me enough time to make that a worthwhile
Yeah.
exercise and economically viable, a no-brainer decision? And actually, it's all of those little things. It's the use of lots of tools that allow you to automate and scale and things like that.
No, that's great. That's great. Cool. Okay. And then one last question. If you lost everything, so you had no contacts, no money, but you had all of your knowledge and experience, what would you do? Where would you start to rebuild? Or if you wouldn't rebuild, if you just go and piss off to some, well, not beach, some mountain somewhere.
Um, I'd I'd focus all of my efforts on methods to raise finance, because without finance, your business is going to be dry no matter what it is. So one way or another, you have to raise finance. Now, part of that might be in actually exchanging time for money, or goods for services, but it could just be building the right contacts and networks and working with other people's money. And if you're focused absolutely on that and nothing else, you would find that you will find people willing to invest in you because they believe in your vision if you're passionate enough about it. I've made an assumption here that I've retained my knowledge about
Yeah, yeah,
property. Is
you've
that
got your
right?
knowledge. You've got your knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah, so absolutely I would take my knowledge and I would build my authority, and I would find my way into network environments, and I would look for partners. I'd look for people that I could work with, and I'd leverage what they had that I didn't have, which is obviously money,
Mhm.
and by the sounds of it, the clothes on my back, possibly my car, whatever it is. But yeah, now I'd really focus on that because finance is the lifeline of any business. Businesses need cash, and certainly property businesses need cash,
Yeah,
because buying
great.
property really is a bit of a pain. It really does need huge amounts of capital, doesn't it? It's not the best business in the world, actually, when it comes to considering capital. It's one of the most capital intensive businesses that you could possibly try and build.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great, fantastic, and I think it's really interesting to hear what you would do if you had to start from scratch in a world where you had absolutely nothing apart from your knowledge. So that's great. That's cool. Cool. Okay. Well, obviously, I will be keeping in touch with you. But how would other people find you? What's the best place for them to find you?
Well, I'm pretty active on Instagram, so you can find me at andygraham.hmo on Instagram. You could join the Facebook community of ours, which is the HMO community. You can find your way there and come and chat to myself and JP and Jade, who run the group. And in January, you'll be able to come and find me directly on the HMO roadmap, which will be the hmoroadmap.co.uk, I think. And on there, you'll find a huge amount of content and resources that might help you systemize and scale your HMO property business. But if you want to see what I'm doing directly and have a look at what I'm doing every day, then Instagram's definitely the best shout.
That's great. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. It's been really great to hear a bit about your story, your kind of background. I wasn't aware of some of those bits and pieces, so it's fantastic to hear about it. And yeah, thank you so much, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Stuart.
So hopefully you got a lot of value from that episode. Andy's a great guy, really experienced, and he is teaching me a lot. I've learned a lot from him already. I hope to work with him for a while yet, so he can help me scale things in a structured, kind of sensible way. If you want to see more about him, I'll make sure his links are in the show notes. Anyway, that's it for me this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. But for now, that's me. I hope you have a great week and best of luck. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please leave me a 5-star review to help other people find it, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button.